Well, yesterday I went shopping and I went to Tesco in Clare Hall, which is a big supermarket in a very staunchly working class part of Dublin. Um, its catchment area would be Darndale, would be a lot of the north side area, would be a lot of Kilbarrack and Donamead as well. It's one of the biggest supermarkets in Dublin, and it has a great range of things. And Tesco being Tesco, it has lots of tinned and dried food for next to nothing. Tesco is the largest supermarket grocery in Ireland. And one of the advantages of Tesco is that although their fresh produce, the meats, the fruits, the breads and things are Irish, milk, all that, they're all Irish. Their tinned foods, their dried foods, their crisps, all those kind of things are imported from Britain. So there's a big economy of scale with Tesco, and they can offer people, particularly people who have a lower income, they can offer them good quality food, nourishing food at a very low price. So it means that nobody has to starve. Nobody has to be malnourished. You can get tinned food in Tesco. And, even if you're on welfare or whatever, you don't have to be malnourished. Big packets of pasta would be something like 50, 60 cents. So there's no need to starve when you have a shop like that. I hadn't been down to that shop since July of this year, since the mask carry-on started. I'd only been shopping locally. Also, there was the lockdown as well, which didn't help. But I went down, and it was like stepping back into January of this year. At least 50% of the people in the shopping centre did not wear masks. And many of the staff in the shops, both the shopping centre shops and Tesco, were not wearing masks as well. It was an uplifting experience. Then I go back to Sutton, which is this kind of bourgeois, nice area next door to Howth, where I live. And, I was there today doing something at the post office and getting some groceries as well. And everybody, all the shoppers have masks on. And they're tramping around in this demoralised way, and nobody's chatting to anybody, and nobody's standing around to talk. I met a few people who I knew, and I told them about going to Tesco yesterday. Aren't they bloody Egypts? No, I said, that's projection, because you're a bloody Egypt for continuing to wear a mask. Blah, 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 blah. I said, look, they didn't do it in RTE, they didn't do it at the golfers' dinner. Are you missing something? Have you a screw loose? Is there something wrong here? And what is wrong is that there are people who read the Irish Times and watch RTE. So anyway, back in Tesco yesterday, down in Clare Hall. It's actually a very good supermarket. It's bright and it's very spacious and has a huge range of stuff, huge range of different foods. It has all kinds of soft drinks and snacks and things that you haven't seen in years in other shops. When I came into the shopping centre, there was a row happening at the chemist's, and none of the staff in the chemist was wearing a mask, and there was a pair of people who I think had been caught shoplifting. And Clare Hall being Clare Hall, there'd have been the best part of 40 other shoppers standing around watching. Because in Sutton they'd be saying, oh darling, no, Josh, move on now. No, leave it, Josh, move it, thank you, move on. No, Karen and Dermot don't want to look at that kind of... No, stop it now. Where at Tesco, Clare Hall, everybody stood to watch the show. So I joined in. I was standing beside a woman in her 30s with her children. She didn't have a mask on. I said, may I ask you a question? Go on, she says. I said, why are you not wearing a mask? She said, same reason as you. Right, I said, because I'm one of the Hope Peninsula's #1 anti-maskers. She said, I haven't worn a mask since August, and I'm not going to. And she said, my children aren't going to either, and I wrote a note at the school telling them that. I said, and what did the school say? The school said nothing, but I just kept sending them in. She said, won't get them a mask, won't have them wearing it. Well, I said, good for you. Well done. You're a good mother. So the woman and I talked for about 5 minutes. And it was like the old days. It was like just talking to Dublin people in a Dublin supermarket. It was like the whole... It was incredible to see the extent to which that whole curse that's still hanging over Sutton has completely gone down in Tesco Clare Hall. Completely gone. Nobody's playing the game anymore. So they've even put back in chairs and benches down there. So as the drama was unfolding up at the chemist shop, I decided to sit down, and I sat beside a woman who was wearing a mask. I said, "Excuse me," I said, "may I ask you a question?" No, I said, "Take the mask off." "But you have to wear a mask." She said, "Well, that's what I was going to ask her." I said, "Why are you wearing a mask?" "You have to wear them." "You don't," I said. "Look at all the people around you not wearing masks. Look at me. What's happened? Nothing's happened." "Well," she said, "you know how it is. I just feel more comfortable." "Okay," I said, "what you're saying to me is that you're choosing to wear a mask. That is your right." I said, "You have the right to choose to wear a mask." I said, "But don't be telling yourself that you have to wear it. You don't. Be clear in your own head about it." I said, "You do not have to wear a mask. You are choosing to wear it." "Well, I'm choosing to." She said, "Good." I said, "That's fine. That's your choice." I said, "In the way that I'm choosing not to. Or that woman over there with the 3 children who I was talking to a moment ago is choosing not to. Or 50% of the other people around here are choosing not to." And it was more seriously to look around that shopping centre. Then I went up and bought the groceries in Tesco. And again, it was full of 50% people not wearing masks. But to look around that shopping centre was to see that the curse is broken there. I don't say that in any way frivolously or lightly. The curse has broken down there. And this is in a predominantly working class part of the city. The catchment of that shopping centre, the Tesco Centre in Clare Hall, would be predominantly working class. And it gives you a great heart. It gives you a great heart. It gives, oh yeah. It's so good to see. It's so good to see. It's so encouraging to see that people down there, have moved on from all of this rubbish about masks. And then you switch on RTE back here, you get out the Irish Times, and they're still harping on with all the rubbish they went on with in April. But it is encouraging, so encouraging to see these people down there. So encouraging to see that they've broken out of this. And, nobody is approaching anyone who's not wearing a mask, because the non-maskers down in Tesco Clare Hall are actually, if they're not at 50%, if they're not at a majority, they're approaching a critical mass down there where nobody's going to say a word. This is very, very, very redolent of something. It's very redolent of how social class matters in all of these things. How there's a class of people who are wedded to a notion that the Irish Times, RTE and the government are their friends. And they're afraid. Thomas Sheridan talks about the normies' fear of change. And it's a fear of themselves. It's a Jungian thing. I've been watching, of all things lately, the Avengers films. So the other night I watched Captain America, which is really the first of the Avengers films. And last night I watched the second of the Avengers films, in which Robert Downey Jr. plays the lead role and Chris Evans plays what I would call the co-lead role. And they're good films. They're very well-made films. Captain America must be seen for what it is. It is propaganda for the military-industrial complex designed to recruit into the American military. In the old days, the 30s and 40s and 50s, propaganda to recruit for the military was a lot less sophisticated than it is now. But propaganda is propaganda because unless you have taken the red pill or are wearing the black glasses, then you don't know that it's propaganda. But propaganda, certainly Captain America was such a well-made and nicely scripted and nicely produced film that would encourage gullible young men to join the army. But it was interesting, they derive from Marvel Comics, and it's interesting to see the sophistication of their script, quite aside from the very high production standard, the really high production standard. But for a superhero, far-fetched, fictional type film, their scripts are very, very sophisticated, well-written, easy to listen to, but a lot of the scientific principles that they rely on for what is essentially a space-age fantasy is sound. So there's a lot of credibility to these films. They are very well thought out. But they are propaganda. They are propaganda. In the second Avengers film, it ends, and this is a plot spoiler, it ends with a portal being opened, whereby a whole load of strange creatures come and devastate New York City. And I was watching it last night, and I said, now, if that had happened in real life, there would be 50, 60, 70,000 dead in New York. Yet this film showed very few, if any, dead bodies, because it's parental guidance. So apparently death doesn't happen in a parental guidance film. And this was, for me, a hole in the credibility of it. If New York City, as I said, had suffered the degree of devastation that it did, that was shown in that film with its excellent visual effects, then the streets of New York would be red with blood, literally red with blood, and there would be bodies left, right, and center. It would be like the bombing of Dresden. There would be bodies left, right, and centre. They'd be hanging out of the windowsills. But of course, there wasn't in that film. So that, for me, was a gap in credibility. It wasn't as good a film as the predecessor, Captain America. That was a very, very well-made film, and well-scripted, and moving, and credible for what it was. Again, here's a plot spoiler for Captain America. A very weak 7-stone weakling of a man agrees to be experimented on and turns into Thor, the superhero, or that equivalent. He becomes an extremely strong muscle man, which Chris Evans in real life actually is. And he then goes on to become a very heroic member of the US Army during the Second World War. So, I mean, even by that description, one can hear the propagandic nature of it. But it was a very good film all the same. This is how propaganda works. Propaganda works by being credible, not by being stupid. And it works by being watchable, not by being boring. To that extent, the propaganda that we're getting on RTE and the Irish Times is none of those things, because it's wearing out. It's the same record we've been hearing since April. It's becoming boring. You know, then we see Tony Holohan wheeled back on again, and how such an effort was made to rehabilitate this monstrous scowl. This monstrous individual, Tony Holohan. Such an effort was made by a whole gang of insiders, including the board of directors of RTE. They all worked together to rehabilitate Tony Holohan. But what I saw down in Tesco Clare Hall yesterday when I was doing the shopping for my parents was that they're failing. Because the nature of the conversation I had with people down in Tesco Clare Hall, okay, there was that woman with her kids, but I was talking to other people as well. First of all, there was a great atmosphere. And people were chatting. It was a real Dublin atmosphere. People were, doing their shopping. You'd stop and chat with people. It had that buzz of Dublin that I love about this city, where strangers will talk shite to one another for 15 minutes about nothing in particular, and then they'll say goodbye and happy Christmas. Dublin is great that way, and the working class parts of Dublin are really good for that. It brought home to me that I would rather, given a choice between living in, say, Ranelagh, Malahide, Clontarf on the one hand, or Darndale, Sheriff Street, Ballymun on the other, I choose Darndale, Sheriff Street, Ballymun. That's said earnestly. My parents come from a working class background, and to that extent my parents are much more out of the matrix than a lot of the people who live quite close to us where we do live, in Howth and Sutton. I felt yesterday that I was among human beings. It's as profound as that. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not being corny when I say that. There was a real sense of being around, for the first time in such a long time, real people. And people with the right emotions and the right attitudes and the right looks in their faces. That blank, grey, inhuman look that I'm seeing when I go shopping in Sutton Cross or even up to Howth, that's gone. That's not down there in Clare Hall. It's not down there. It was terribly cheering and terribly encouraging what I encountered yesterday. It brought home to me that part of the gaslighting, one of the features of gaslighting, it brought home to me that one of the features of gaslighting is to make the victim feel that they're hopeless and that there's nothing they can do. And that's a deliberate lie with gaslighting. It's a deliberate lie. I've come across in my own life people who tried to gaslight me. It was many, many years before I analysed properly how psychopathology really works. The last time I was successfully gaslit was when I was in my teenage years at secondary school, and after that, even at my own instinctive, crude level, I said, no, I'm not having that again. When I left secondary school, I completed secondary school at the age of 17, I just turned around and said to myself, first of all, I'm having no more contact with that school, and secondly, I wasn't well treated there, but I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen again. Had I been aware at the age of 17 of the real nature of pathology and psychopathology, it would have armed me a lot more. But it's an instinct. Do you smell bullshit? So when somebody's gaslighting you, you smell bullshit. Nowadays, at the age of 47, with all the knowledge I've gained, including from people like Thomas Sheridan and his excellent books on psychopathology, I know exactly you can see gaslighting in 2 seconds. You're talking to somebody on the phone and they're gaslighting you. You know it now, and you know it consciously, and you can analyse it, and they're on the back foot, and they know it. These gowls know it, that they're now, it's not like what it was. They cannot assume the way they used to be able to. And the people down in Tesco Clare Hall, they're not going to necessarily, all of them, be the ones who bring about the next revolution and bring down this sick, woke, globalist edifice that is causing so much damage here. The NGOs, race baiting is one of them. It's one of the worst. I think the NGOs is the worst cancer, most evil cancer and seditious influence in the history of this country. I think it's worse than the IRA was in the Troubles. And that's saying a lot, because I was very much opposed and remain very much opposed to what the IRA did in the late 1960s, 70s, 80s and 90s. I'm a fierce opponent of what they did. I'm a fierce opponent of Sinn Féin for its history of sectarian violence and thuggery and gangsterism. Absolutely. But I would go further and say that the NGOs are worse. Okay, they didn't blow up shopping centres or put bombs in bars, which the IRA did do. That's right. But in another regard, the NGOs are using our taxes here to undermine the stability and security of the state. So we have this very sick, perverted situation where these bodies are being paid our taxes to insult us and to cause trouble. Ibn Joseph is an example of that. Ibn Joseph is a tenured academic in a public university here, being paid public funds to cause trouble and insult us. That's very sick. That's very sick. That's a cancer. And we can see how much damage it's causing. But people, again, you know, if you look, people are waking up to that. They're wising up to that. There was a general election in this country this year, and afterwards I said to myself, now I no longer give a fuck about the Irish people. I no longer care about the people who are happy to let 35 Fine Gaelers get back into the Dáil, not even mentioning 17 Greens. That remains my position. I'm never going to run for public office. And there's a great sense of liberation when you do that, similar to not raising money for my internet content, similar to not crowdfunding or any of these things. I'm beholden to nobody. That absolutely remains my position. But at the same time, you look around Clare Hall and you realise that there's hope. Okay, the NGOs don't want us to live in hope. The NGOs, the continuous line of the NGOs, such as Rethink Ireland, is that we are all bad people, and that they, the NGOs, will tell us how to think. Rethink Ireland. There's another NGO started, Clare, you know, again, fighting the far right. They don't say what the far right is, they don't say who it is or how they're going to fight it, but they're just creating this notion that there is a far right out there. This again was like the thing that emerged earlier this year, the anti-maskers. Great, thanks, you've given us an identity, we're anti-maskers. And, you know, then I think that's probably why, or could be a contributory reason to why you go down to these working class places and hardly anyone's wearing a mask anymore. Oh, it's so encouraging. Or maybe they've just all stopped fucking watching RTE.